I think we probably, for the most part, are all familiar with that idea of Jesus saying that we have faith that's not even the size of a mustard seed. We've been hearing that all our lives, but what does that mean? What is Jesus telling us? And the first thing we have to explore is, what is a mustard seed? Well, like its name implies, a mustard seed is a seed that when it's ground up and mixed with other ingredients, it becomes that condiment that I don't happen to enjoy, but a lot of people like to put on their hamburgers and hot dogs. That makes mustard. And its plant is pretty big and it's pretty fast growing. But a mustard seed is about that big. It's a tiny little seed. And the metaphor that Jesus is going for here is to suggest that even when we might think that we might be the most faithful person around, our faith is really not that big. Now, we can think and we can convince ourselves that we know things about God, and we can convince ourselves that we know how to follow that path that leads to heaven, and we can put a lot of work into finding out those things. But in the end, we don't know with certainty that we're right. And studying theology is kind of weird because it's one of those fields where you realize the more that you study about theology, the less you actually know about theology. And interestingly enough, today we are celebrating the life of St. Francis of Assisi. Now, today is not his feast day. Today is Sunday, and the church rules are very strict about not letting us celebrate a saint's feast day on a Sunday. But we're going to remember Francis. So in a sense, we're kind of celebrating his feast day. And we're doing animal blessings today. I see some animals. The animals are very well behaved, by the way. I haven't heard too many barks or fights, so that's a good thing, right? But we do animal blessings when we celebrate Francis because Francis is known as the caretaker for animals and all living things. But Francis is so much more than that. And I think there's a coincidence in today's gospel passage, which did not come from Francis's feast day. It's today's Sunday gospel. But the coincidence is that if we want to enhance our faith, then a really good person we can look to as an example of how to do that is our buddy, Francis of Assisi. Now, some people are surprised to learn that Francis is considered one of what we unfortunate verbiage, unfortunate vocabulary, but Francis is considered to be a lesser saint on our calendar. And his feast day, which was yesterday, is not a major feast day in the Episcopal Church. And at the same time, Francis is probably, if not the most beloved, one of the most beloved saints in the history of the Christian Church. So why is he so beloved? And I think there's a connection between Francis and some of this mustard seed stuff. Because Francis was a dude with some pretty big faith. Francis was born to a wealthy family. And as a child, he had everything he wanted. And the only reason that he didn't have a Ferrari when he was a teenager is because they hadn't been invented yet. Right? Now, according to legend, Francis was charming and good-looking and smart, and he loved to wear the finest clothing, and he would spend tons of money without even batting an eye about it. And let's be honest, he's the kind of guy that if we were in high school and he were in high school at the same time, we would want to be a friend of Francis because we could get some stuff out of that, right? But one day, this wealthy, charming, good-looking, handsome, smart guy was approached by a beggar and asked for money. And at first, he told the beggar no, and he sent him away. But then Francis remembered the words of Matthew's gospel, where Jesus says, Whatever you did to the least of these, you did to me. And he realized that that beggar may have been Christ in person. And Francis went after the beggar, tracked him down, and gave the beggar everything that he had on his person. Now, his friends turned their back on him. And his father, understandably, became quite angry with him. But Francis, from then on, decided he wanted to live a life of poverty. And so he gave away everything he owned, everything that was his fortune that his parents were planning on leaving to him. And once during a pilgrimage to Rome, he had a mystical experience where Jesus on the cross told Francis, "Repair my church and keep it from tumbling to the ground." And because of this message, he gave an immense sum of money to a parish priest. And after he did that, he hid in a cave for a month because he wasn't sure how his dad was going to react. Well, that was a good decision to hide in that cave, because when he came back, right, a month later, dirty and hungry, well, his father beat him, kicked him out of the house. Francis left his home and gave his life to God, relinquishing everything that he owned, including his clothing. Now, when we think of St. Francis, we probably have this image of someone wearing those traditional brown robes that are still worn by Franciscan friars today. And in today's world, if we see someone wearing Franciscan garb, that person stands out. Right? But in Francis's days, those robes were the robes that poor people would wear. And they were intended to do the opposite of standing out. And Francis established a religious order, and he encouraged his followers to join him by living in poverty. Now, somehow people were drawn to Francis and to the way of life that he modeled. And as his order grew, he was joined by a woman named Claire in his ministry. And they established together what we sometimes call the Poor Clares, or also the second order of Franciscans. And what about the people who really admired Francis and really liked the rule of life that he taught, but they weren't quite ready to give up everything they own and to live in poverty? Well, good news, because he established the third order of Franciscans. Now, third order Franciscans still follow the rule of life, but they're not expected to live in poverty. And Francis encouraged preaching about Jesus. And there's a saying that's attached to him, although we don't know if it's authentic. But we sometimes hear people say, "Preach the gospel at all times, and if necessary, use words." And that's where we can look to Francis as an example of someone who lives into his faith. Live the gospel. Don't just tell people about the gospel. Live the gospel. That's why we admire Francis, because he wasn't just someone who told us a bunch of stuff. He didn't just talk the talk. He actually walked the walk. So why do we bless animals on his feast day? Well, Francis loved the world. And he believed that it was our human responsibility to care for the earth and everything in it. And theologians agree. In Genesis, when we're told that God gave us dominion over all creation, it's not God giving us authority like a dictator to rule over creation. It's God giving us the responsibility. It's God charging us with the responsibility to take care of all of those things that God has given us. And this includes, of course, all living things. Now we might ask ourselves, what about the bad animals? Well, there's another Francis legend that has to do with just that. There's a legend about the wolf. A wolf was terrorizing the village. And Francis, who is said to have had a way with animals, went and had a conversation with the wolf. He asked the wolf, "Why are you terrorizing the community?" And the wolf says, "'Cause I'm hungry." The wolf was eating the people's sheep and even attacking some of the people. But the wolf says, "I'm hungry. What do you expect?" Right? So Francis struck a deal with the wolf and says, "If we feed you, will you stop terrorizing us?" And the wolf said, "Yeah, I can do that." So from then on, the people of the village fed the wolf, and the wolf no longer terrorized the community. Another legend about Francis says that when he would preach, everyone would listen, even the animals. And there's another story about Francis preaching to an outdoor gathering when a flock of birds came right before he started preaching and listened very politely and attentively and didn't leave until he was done preaching. And they flew away. Now, did these events really happen the way that the legends tell us they did? Well, who knows? Who knows? But they're great stories. They're great stories, and they're great examples of a peaceful person who cared about all of creation. And I, for one, think that's a pretty good thing to be. Now, to this day, there are Franciscans of the first, second, and third orders. And my grandmother actually was a third order Franciscan. And when she died, she was buried in her Franciscan habit. But I think all of us, even if we're not Franciscans, I think all of us follow Francis at least a little bit. Because we all like the idea of being generous. And we all like the idea of being kind and personable and relatable. And we all like the idea of preaching the gospel, especially if we don't have to use words to do it. And we all take the environment and everything that lives here on the earth seriously. And we ask, even the wolves? Yeah, even the wolves. What about scorpions and snakes? Yeah, even scorpions and snakes. Because they all have a place in our ecosystem. And they are all creatures of God. Now, disclaimer, I am perfectly happy for the wolves and the coyotes and the scorpions and snakes to stay as far away from me as possible. But I also don't have a desire to see them disappear off the planet. Like Francis's wolf, they can do their thing as long as they let me do mine and don't bother me. So imagine the kind of faith that it would take to give up everything you own and just trust that everything's going to be okay. Are you willing to do that? Because I'm not. Now, I'm happy to be giving of myself. And I'm happy, for instance, to buy a bowl of soup for a hungry person who can't afford one. But I'm not willing to drain my bank account and just throw caution completely into the wind. Now, should I do that? Maybe. Jesus did call his disciples to give up everything and to follow him. Am I going to do that? Probably not. Let's be honest, right? But it is something that we can aspire toward. And maybe I can be inspired to be a little more giving, or a little more mystical, or a little more environmentally conscientious, or a little more faithful. Francis is a beloved saint, and by his example, many of us keep our beloved pets. And you know something? Our pets are probably some of our best friends. Now, my dog, Ari, is kind of a pain. But at the same time, she's my pal. And she's always loyal, and she's always loving, and she's always looking out for me, and she's never judgmental of anything I tell her, and she's always ready to greet me with kisses when I come home. And like your animals are to you, my animal is a blessing in my life. And she's a reminder to me of the goodness of God. Ari has the kind of faith in me that I wish I had in God. And Francis had the kind of faith in God that I wish I had in God. Now, can I get there? Maybe. But does God love me even if I can't get there? Yes, absolutely. Does any of us, if we're honest, does any of us have faith even the size of a mustard seed? Probably not. Can we get a little bit closer if we follow the example set for us by Francis? I think so. I think so. And can we honor God by offering thanksgiving for the creatures that God created to live with us? Yes. Even the wolves and the scorpions and the coyotes and the snakes, but especially the animals that we welcome into our homes. In a short time, we're going to bless those animals in Francis's honor. And God has blessed us with their presence, and we will offer thanksgiving for the joy and the love that they share with us. We have a lot we can learn from our animals, and we have a lot we can learn by following the lead of St. Francis of Assisi.